Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth. Now, I did want to comment very briefly on the Secret Service brouhaha coming out of South America and the President's recent visit there. Well, seeing that they're trying to say that this was all brought to light over a dispute about the agent or agents actually paying for the services of a prostitute in the amount of $47, and apparently disputing whether or not the amount was paid, and this is how this whole scandal came to be brought about. Well, as has been pointed out by others, I am convinced that there is more to this story than simply the stiffing of a prostitute and the refusal to pay a relatively paltry $47 for the services of a girl of the evening. So I would be surprised if this issue does not turn into something broader and bigger. It's certainly worth keeping your eyes on. Now, I did want to broaden this out a little bit and talk about two other issues of very high importance as far as I'm concerned. And that is a new look at the free trade and how it has actually impacted us in the many years since we first had NAFTA, for instance, put into place in this country. Now, you know my position on free trade agreements. They should all be thrown out, chopped up, burned, shat upon, and then buried, because they're all piles of fucking shit. Now, I had been operating under the assumption that when we have a free trade agreement with a country X that pays its workers 50 cents an hour, let's say, and of course we have high wages in this country, that what you would see is the offshoring of jobs, and that there would be a tendency for wages in our country to go down to approaching the level of the country that we were doing the free trade with. But it's even worse than that. In the case of Mexico, what you have is, prior to NAFTA being implemented, Mexican wages were actually rising. And the gap between the average U.S. wage and Mexican wage was smaller than it is now. But what you have is Mexican wages have fallen and U.S. wages have fallen as well. And it appears as though the trend is going to continue in both cases. So what you end up having with free trade is not a bottoming out at the level of the lowest partner. What you have instead is a complete bottoming out of the entire fucking wage platform altogether, so that it goes even below what you were starting with in the least affluent partner in the trade agreement. So it's much worse in that regard. And of course, because of the import-export deals that were worked out in the NAFTA agreement, Mexico, instead of having a lot of people operating on farms producing their own food, actually imports a lot more food, and a great many people in rural areas in Mexico have been put out of work. What's the sense of running a farm if you can't sell it? You can't compete with the prices that are offered through the bilateral trade agreement. So massive amounts of people have been displaced. There are no jobs for them. So what has this engendered? It has engendered an increase in immigration to this country, both legal and illegal, but of course legal immigration being rather difficult to attain, it amounts to illegal in 99.9% of the cases. So NAFTA has increased the immigration problem because of the displacement of indigenous workers in Mexico. So it's even worse. It's been even worse for Mexico, which is even hard to believe for me. But we have seen exactly what happens whenever these free trade agreements happen. We see the loss of thousands and thousands of jobs in this country. But at the same time, you see a complete decimation of the entire cultural system in Mexico. You would see this in every other case that you could point to. And all the benefits that are touted by the people that talk about free trade only point out the positives. They will say that X number of jobs were created and X number of increases in exports were obtained. But they do not tell you the number of jobs that were lost as a result of it. And you would find that if you tallied up both of those numbers, that there is a net job loss in this country. And because of the displacement of so many people in Mexico, it has meant that a tremendous number, a huge number of Mexicans have been put out of work as a result of this. So you see an increase in unemployment in both countries. And the net trade comes out about even. So there's no benefit there. There's actually nothing beneficial to any single person in Mexico or the United States to NAFTA. You know who gets all the benefits? Guess who? The fucking corporations that run every fucking thing in this entire fucking world. The corporations and the banks. That's it. They're the only people with power. They're the only ones behind the scenes that are running every fucking thing. That's it. They run it all. They control everything. They have insidiously implanted themselves within every government, every bank structure, everything, so that they control every fucking thing. And that includes, sadly, the FDA itself too, which I have talked about many, many times, about the revolving door between pharmaceutical companies and the FDA. Now, some of you might be rather surprised to learn, some of you won't be, of course, that the FDA has a program called Fast Track, because they want to see more beneficial drugs get into the marketplace faster to help people. Well, of course. The only thing that they need to do in order to get a drug through the Fast Track program is a pharmaceutical company needs to prove that a drug is not going to kill you. Now, I would, right there, stop right there, because their own studies in the past have been ginned up and crookified so fucking much that they deliberately hide and obfuscate data showing death in correlation with their fucking drugs. So it has already been proven that the pharmaceutical companies will gin up their fucking studies to hide the murder rate of their fucking drugs. And yet we're to say, okay, because this drug might be beneficial to somebody down the road, just so long as it doesn't kill somebody, we're going to let it be approved and put it out in the marketplace. Which in effect makes everybody who takes that drug part of a giant pool of people who are being experimented on. There is no guarantee that these new drugs will do anything for you. And they might still kill you, despite what these drug studies say. We've had examples of this with VIOXX. Their own studies hid the relationship to heart events and strokes. And then we had PAXIL and teen suicide, deliberately hidden, deliberately covered up by the companies selling those drugs. And why is this happening? Because the pharmaceutical companies run the fucking FDA. So when I talk about, let me just make this point very clear. When I talk about the government doing anything, it presupposes that certain conditions are met first. And that is that corporations are routed out of the fucking government. And that banks are routed out of the entire Treasury Department and the finance system of this fucking country. that all ties between corporations and the government are severed. There is no more revolving door. If you work for the FDA, you're barred from working for a fucking pharmaceutical company for life in any capacity. And if you work for a pharmaceutical company, you can never, ever, ever work for the fucking government in any regulatory capacity that has any interest in any kind with pharmaceuticals or drugs or anything else covered in relation to anything that you did in the private sector. For life! And if you work for a private investment bank like Goldman fucking Sachs, you cannot ever, ever, ever work for the government and have any fucking connection to even the slightest to any kind of financial decisions of the federal government. That would mean all of the Goldman Sachs motherfuckers in the Treasury Department would have to go. And all of the motherfuckers from the pharmaceutical companies would have to be kicked out of the FDA. And the two people that would be left there would have to have an entire new staff brought in. You see, there are certain presuppositions, and that is that the government actually is working for people and not completely infested with corporate fucking stooges, spies, and shills who do nothing but promote an agenda that is completely disinterested in what matters to you or me, and the only thing they do is promote thing after thing after thing that continues to increase profits to corporations and gives money away to the rich and to banks and bail out everybody except you and me. Can't have us be given anything to pay off our debts, but we could certainly give trillions of dollars in loans to banks to make their balance book look better. So there is a presupposition there. And I want you to keep that in mind. Anytime I talk about the government this or the government that, I'm talking about a government that is actually working for individual people in this country. Families, people, mothers, fathers, children, actual, real, living human beings. And just keep that in mind before you come down on me whenever I talk about the government, like with single payer, having the government run a single payer program. I'm talking about a government that is not infested with corporations. I'm talking about a government that is actually responsive to people in this country. And without the undue influence, without the lobbying, without the corporate money, without the Wall Street money, without the finance from all of these insidious capitalists, companies and corporations and banks all over and through this country. You got to get that money and influence out of there. So look into NAFTA. See how bad it really is. And think how bad it is for us here in the U.S., but how much worse it is for so many people in Mexico. And how this is one of the most horrific trade deals that was ever passed. And there are more being crafted all the time. And they're basically rubber stamped right through Congress and the Senate, and nobody seems to give a shit. I'd like somebody to give a shit about something once, you know. Just one Federal Reserve loan to one bank for how many ever billions of dollars would go a long way to helping people pay down their mortgage debt that is way underwater. And yet there's not even a hint of anything like that. And Congress passes a bill to give tax breaks to companies that is not going to do anything to increase jobs, but just allow people to keep more money. And their JOBS Act, the supposed Jobs Act, actually wouldn't do a fucking thing at all, except allow a new Ponzi scheme bubble economy by allowing businesses to start up and sell stock and allow investment into their company and require absolutely no accounting of any time by professional accounting or CPA for a number of years so that they can run a complete scam Ponzi scheme for years, raking in money and having to show no actual documents that are supported by any kind of accounting, CPA, nothing. They don't have to do a damn thing. And if you think that wouldn't be rife with fucking fraud and that it wouldn't create another fucking bubble, Jesus Christ. I mean, really. This is what they offer. These are their big plans, their ways of affecting things. It's all a joke, of course. Everything is like a magician's show. You know, all we do is watch the various rabbits come out of the hats, the various ribbons changing colors, and the various birds, you know, coming out of puffs of smoke. Maybe someday people will care enough to do something about it. Thank you. Good day.